It's episode 230, so you know what that means. Every 10th episode, it's fan-submitted mocks. So what we're going to be talking about today is mocks that have been submitted by you, the audience. We're going to talk about those, see what they've got, see all the cool stuff that they've done, talk about the techniques, and see what sort of stuff the community's doing, and see if it can inspire us for all of our future builds. So in terms of submitting mocks to the show, I know that's a question people often have. I do mention at the end of every episode, it's also in the description below though, but there is the submission email. It's on your screen right now, so if you want to see your mocks in future episodes, whether they're the fan-submitted mock episodes, or if they're just sort of sporadically put throughout different episodes of BIS, because that is also the case. I don't just exclusively put these in these episodes, but yeah, every 10th episode is made just to spotlight the fan-submitted mocks that people do submit. So yeah, bissubmission@hotmail.com. If you want to send a mock through, send it through that email, and I'll do my best to put it on the show when I can. But that's enough about how this all works. Let's get into these specific mocks today. The first fan-submitted mock we've got is by Biophant Samurai. Very, very cool guy. And this is called Makuta Toad. I love this. I adore this. Frogs? Sure, why not? Love a good frog. I had a frog in my Lego room the other day. He was not meant to be there, but he was very cute. But talking about the mock now, the first thing that I love about this that really grabbed me is the awesome tongue design. So it uses one of the pieces from Kalma, the Baraki, the kind of cool like orange like tentacle weapon whip thing that he had. And I love the choice of using that for the tongue. Not only is it a lovely, awesome part use, but I don't know, to me, the fact that it's orange and the fact that kind of the general kind of like shape of that tongue, and has a sort of like holes and growths on it and stuff. There's something about it that looks a little bit kind of like feral, a little bit sort of off. And the fact that this is like a Makuta Toad, the fact that it's, you know, a more evil toad, I think that's very fitting. There's something about it where it's like, man, this frog is probably carrying some sort of disease, and if it were to fight you, it probably has some cool like poison powers and stuff like that. So I think that's a really solid choice. Not only is it a good part use, but it has sort of like justification for character. So like that's an extra juicy good part use there. That's fantastic. So love the inclusion of that. Some of the other things I love about this mock is the way that he's kind of blocked the colors here. There's kind of three different shades of purple on this. There's the sort of original kind of darker purple, which you can see as the Pakari, the Onua masks that are used sort of like as the knees on this frog here. Some of the different tubing elements, and then sort of stuff that's also on the face as well. There's that darker purple. And then when purple changed to the color that it is today, which was more commonly used throughout like CCBS and on like Friends sets today, that sort of thing. That's, yeah, you can kind of see that sort of more kind of towards the top of the frog. And then when we look at the back there, there's this like violet color. I think it's called violet. It came on a Jango Fett like Technic build set back in, you know, early 2000s when the Attack of the Clones movie came out. It was a fantastic set, an amazing set, but that specific like violet color only really appeared in that set. It's a really unique color. But yeah, with all that in mind, the way that he's blocked it, so the older purple kind of is just sort of like little highlighty stuff like around the face and almost sort of like markings, like the way he's used those tubing elements. It looks like sort of, I don't know, some sort of intricate pattern that you might see on some sort of frog, or almost kind of like a tribal paint of sorts, maybe not, but you know, it has this distinct pattern to it. Then the rest of the purple sort of is sort of the kind of bulk of the body, and then the violet color is kind of really only used at the back there. I don't know, to me that's just sort of grouping it in a nice fashion there, which I think works really well. And I think, too, the inclusion of this frog being purple, again, I think it works with that, you know, Makuta Toad idea that this mock is sort of capitalizing on. But it also kind of reminds me of, like, poison dart frogs and other sort of crazy frogs that have those very kind of bright and vibrant colors to them. So I like that it's sort of reminiscent of that, but the purple still is that sort of, like, darker colors and tone to it, which makes you think of, you know, Makuta and evil things and all that sort of stuff. So, yeah, I think it's a fantastic choice there. Really, really cool. The overall face design is really nice as well. How he's kind of used that Hordika Wenawa mask there as sort of that little kind of posable mouth there. I think that's awesome. It's a fun little way of doing that. But also the overall shaping of it is just really, really nice. It works quite well. And I love the inclusion of those like lime ball joints there as the eyes on this frog here. There's something so like classic Rahi about that, and just kind of like classic Bionicle. You know, nowadays you do have your, you know, your like mixel ball joints and stuff that have like eyes printed over them. And those ball joint pieces can have different forms of printing used on on them these days. So maybe you could have done something that was a little more unique or a little bit more realistic or had a little bit more sort of like grit to it, or some sort of printing that really enhanced it. And maybe that could have looked good, but I love the sort of classic feel that just that sort of stark, like popping lime, just pure lime there. To me, it works really well and really has that like essence of Bionicle to it. I think it's awesome. So yeah, a fantastic frog design, really, really well done, and just something so like quintessentially Bionicle about this build. I think it's beautiful. So love your work, good sir. Let's move on to the next mock now, and this one is called the Bad Guy of the Pit, and this is by Braylon Turner. So this is actually based off a very old, well, somewhat old Lego set, which it seems has a very long set number, which you can, that's not the set number, that's it. Why are there 2 numbers on this? Yeah, whatever. Still, this set is called Bad Guy. Fantastic, very creative, very well thought out name on Lego's behalf there. But I believe this was sort of like a more limited release, like polybag or promo thing. I know sometimes there were Bionicle sets that came with like batteries and stuff back in the day. So like, I probably had a more limited release. I don't fully know. But look, it's a bit more of a sort of quirky, more sort of basic build. So it's awesome to see Braylon here completely reimagine it and kind of give it the glory that it deserved. To me, it has this almost sort of like Cthulhu vibe now, which I think is awesome, especially because, you know, it isn't meant to be a sort of underwater character, so it's certainly very fitting there. And I mean, that's very, very easily conveyed in this fantastic face design with all these different eyes and tires and those different sort of like tail pieces there, sort of almost kind of like the sort of like tentacle face that Cthulhu has there. It's awesome. And combining it with that marbled Karapar armor piece that's in black and white, which comes on one of the system Bionicle play sets. To me, it has this beautiful underwater aesthetic now. There's something about that, the like different tire elements that have been used, as well as a lot of the sort of smoother textures on this that give it this sort of like octopus, like eel, that sort of like oily, sort of like thick skin that you can see on different sort of like underwater creatures. It almost looks like it's sort of like got a somewhat sort of like wet texture to it almost, you know. It's fantastic, I think. So I think some really nice attention to detail that's been paid attention to with the textures on all these different pieces that give it this very solid underwater aesthetic, as well as this very sort of like ancient, sinister, kind of scary sea monster look as well, which is just perfect for the Toa Mari and that sort of general wave of sets there. It's awesome. It's really, really cool. So I think it's a great way of reimagining Bad Guy and actually making him look a lot more sort of, well, sinister and bad guy-like. So he's kind of, I don't know, given more homage to the name there, and justified it a bit more, if you will. So it's really, really cool. The finger design on this is a bit more unique. In general, the sort of overall hand design and arm design and everything on this, I like the fact that he has these big, strong, beefy legs and these sort of more skinny kind of like flaily arms here, and how they kind of overhang in a weird way. There's a very unique body shape to this character here, and I love that. I adore that. I think it's great to really kind of play around with it and be very sort of non-humanoid with it to a degree, you know? It's cool. But the actual fingers themselves, that's technically some illegal techniques going on there. They're not, well, the minifigure hand pieces, the way they're kind of being placed in there, some of them are at a sort of slight angle, so they're not sort of fully placed in there. So you could argue that is illegal, putting a bit of stress on those pieces. And the way that the actual arm and hand from a minifigure is being placed for sort of the thumbs on there is very much not being placed in a legal manner. It's being sort of clipped onto the side of a clip there, so you know, yeah, you could argue it's a little bit more illegal, and that doesn't always, you know, work well for some people. But I don't know, I kind of like the fact that these fingers have this more sort of like thin, kind of gangly look to them, and it's sort of like sharper angles to it as well, which I think kind of adds to the sinister look of it. So I think it's kind of interesting that there's almost sort of a meta sense that makes these fingers even more kind of creepy and sinister, because it is a little bit unnatural with the way the building techniques have been done. And I think this creature in general is very sort of unnatural, otherworldly, and monster-like. So it's kind of interesting how there's sort of a meta commentary there, almost, with the way that he's designed this and how it sort of makes you feel and how it can convey that sort of bad guy monster element. So I don't know, I really like that. I think it's kind of unique and pretty cool. So I think it's a really great way of using some illegal techniques. I quite enjoy the knees on this creature here. How he's sort of embedded those tires on their side like that to get that very unique texture that sort of forms that kind of rough knee shape. It's cool to see those ties on their side like that. I don't know, because you see how he's used the ties in other places here. They just sort of wrap around different limb elements and stuff like that. But it's nice to see the angle being used there quite well, I think. So, yeah, really, really solid mock, this one. Love your work. Let's move on now to the next mock. This is a pretty cool one. This is Shin Tahu by Lunar Still. Now, there's a few things I like about this. In general, I like the idea of revamping Tahu with more of a sort of like Ronin samurai aesthetic of sorts. He's obviously got a lot of pieces from the Elite Praetorian Guard set, specifically like the cloth elements and the very sort of samurai-looking armor piece that's been used sort of as the shoulder armor there, which is, you know, very reminiscent of that of a samurai, of course. So I think the slight little inclusion of those specific pieces there works phenomenally. I think it's a great little addition there, and it's almost kind of the only thing on there that gives it that samurai look, other than the weapons as well. But gosh, it works so well, and it's just really the inclusion of sort of like 2 or 3 different pieces there. So I love that that's how that's done there. Simple, subtle, but it goes a long way, and it really, really works in my opinion. And also, Tahu, specifically like G2 Tahu, I think actually has, it sort of lends itself nicely to that samurai Ronin sort of look there. So personally, I think that's awesome. Little subtle stuff there, but it's going a long way and doing some cool, cool things. So yeah, phenomenal work in that regard. I love to, there's sort of like, I don't know, kind of like fire effects on his arm, kind of a sort of like the Pokemon Blaziken almost. I think it's really cool. Especially some of these poses here, he just makes them look awesome. And I always like it when people sort of really up the fact that certain Bionicle characters, you know, can control a specific element. And you can really see that on the character, whether it's like a Toa of Ice that has like an ice beard or ice just growing out of their body, or, you know, like this, a Toa of Fire with like actual fire on their body and stuff like that. I know, to me, that's just an aesthetic that I personally very much enjoy. But I think the idea of sort of putting it on the shoulders there just looks really cool, and it, you know, it very much looks like he's sort of like, I don't know, charging up an attack, or there's just sort of a ferocity to it, which I think works for this sort of, you know, very skilled warrior look that this character has. So I think that's a great idea, a great way of sort of just like adding a little something extra to the character, and it really working. So it's pretty cool. So yeah, a lot of stuff to like about this very nice revamp of Tahu here. And also just in general, I think that's a great idea too. If you do want to revamp some of your favorite Bionicle characters, why not do that? Like find some sort of, you know, something like that, like a samurai, or I don't know, a space warrior, a time cop, I don't know, a Spartan, you know, something like that. Finding some sort of warrior of the past, or just a sort of cool trope, or you know, something unique, and applying that to the character. You know, I think that's a really cool idea. So, something to consider. On to the next mock now. This is by Tigaris, and this is called Ryobix RY-081X version 8. I love this. I adore this. This is a fantastic mock. It kind of has this specific aesthetic of, and it was sort of saying it in the first few sentences of the backstory that I read, of it sort of being this like man-made machine that's like designed to kill and that sort of stuff. And honestly, I really do get that just from looking at this character here. I love the color scheme. I love the sort of futuristic look that it has. And I found this picture here. I just sort of like Googled like a future robot or whatever. And the majority of the color schemes of the images that were coming up were this sort of black and white, and then some sort of translucent color that went with it. In this case, it was that sort of translucent blue. But in this case, it's that sort of translucent red, which I think works for it being a sort of death robot of sorts. So I love that. Just that color scheme alone to me really does scream a sort of futuristic robot. So I don't know, if you're looking to build something like that, that's a color scheme you might want to consider. And honestly, that black and white color scheme is perfectly complemented by any sort of translucent color. This could have easily worked with your trans greens, your trans yellows, whatever. Trans purple would look lovely as well. So yeah, by all means, if you want to play around with a really good color scheme, black, white, and any translucent color, I think would work wonderfully, because as we see here, it works smashingly well. I love the arm design as well, the fact that the arms seem to sort of like flip upside down, or maybe kind of transform in some manner, and these awesome like Ninjago trans orange blades come out as this cool sort of offensive weapon. And the fact that they sort of just kind of tilt backwards when it's not sort of in like attack mode, I guess. I don't know, it's just a really cool aesthetic of these big blades just sort of, I don't know, packed in the back or whatever. Looks really cool. There's just a sort of general kind of nice, just sort of silhouette to this mock. I don't know, it just looks really cool. And speaking of looking really cool, lots of cool like tentacle arms and stuff. That's awesome. I think that also sort of seems very fitting for that of a sort of like man-made death machine having multiple different limbs that sort of just, I don't know, appear out of the monster or the robot, excuse me, and do all these monstrous things. That's where I was trying to get with that word. Looks cool, and just using those ratchet joint pieces that you see on like your Doc Ock minifigures and things like that, and I think they come as like spider legs on like Shelob and other different spider sets across LEGO system sets. They're awesome pieces, and they certainly get the job done of making these really sinister, cool-looking tentacles that can be used as sort of like offensive weapons that appear to be tearing these poor people apart. So that's pretty cool. I seem to neglect the backs of MOCs. I don't know, I don't always look at them, but I do like the back design of this MOC here. All these different trans-orange blades and things sticking out of it. Kind of looks like sort of like an echidna of sorts. And I know there's a sort of sense of like kind of movement or speed to it as well that I quite like. You get the sense maybe this killer robot here would move quite fast or something. I don't know, it just looks cool, so that's awesome. Custom mask on this one as well, which looks lovely, and I think it's kind of the cherry on top of this here. The mask does have these more sort of like, there's more sort of sinister quality to it, the sort of sharp angles of the eyes and the sort of like skull-like design of the sort of base of it with the sort of like teeth of it of sorts. Yeah, something very sinister about that I think gives this MOC a lot of character. So love it when a good custom mask really brings the MOC together, and I think this is a fantastic example of that. So yeah, love this MOC. Love all the different pictures of it as well, with it in action or just standing next to some other cool looking stuff. It's awesome. So yeah, it's a fantastic MOC. This next MOC is by Ahri, and it's called the Big Scorpion Rahi. So in the email, they said that this MOC was inspired or sort of based off of a canon character called Zivon. It's got Z's and V's in it, hard to say, but a unique character. A very unique character. It's kind of just like 3 Visorak shoved together with a whole bunch of crazy like scorpion tails and legs and things, which is actually pretty cool, but it is certainly more of a product of its time. It's certainly using the pieces that were only available then, and I think, the way we build has certainly evolved, so I always love seeing people take these sort of canon characters in the Bionicle storyline and reimagining them with more modern pieces and techniques and things. And I think this is sort of inspired by that and not inherently like a direct revamp of sorts. But regardless, it's cool. And you can certainly see some of the subtle elements of it and some nice changes to it at the same time. So let's dive in. What I like about this is I quite like the idea of a sort of like scorpion, but there's sort of like more of like a body to it, so it's sort of like standing up a bit more, and that's cool. Like, scorpions are awesome. Always loved a good scorpion, and just this big nice tail design here using those big trans like light blue like claw pieces that I think came on like Chima sets and stuff. The fact that they're being used not only as the sort of stinger tail on the scorpion gets that shape sort of represented very nicely as well, but the fact that they're used as like tusks or like, I don't know, horns or whatever on the very front of this MOC here, there's just some nice consistency seeing that used just sort of throughout the MOC here. So I love that, and I don't know, it kind of reminds me of some of those like big scary like stag beetles and things where they just have big like horns and stuff, and you're like, God, that would be terrifying to run into. Or just a scorpion where they have big stinger tails and things. So it's nice to see all the sort of scary stuff that you see on wildlife just shoved into this here to create this more terrifying creature. It's awesome. I love too the kind of claw design that they have, using those Paraka feet pieces to very nicely represent claws. It's a very, very nice little part used there and works quite well. And yeah, just in general, there's a sort of very menacing look to this awesome Rahi here, which I enjoy. I also quite enjoy the fact that they used a Visorak head. You just don't see people using Visorak heads all that much, and I love the Visorak. They were good fun. I remember collecting them when they came out, and I very much enjoyed them. So yeah, it's just, I don't know, they're just such big, bulky pieces. They're just hard to use, and sometimes you see it used as like thigh armor or just sort of integrated into the bodies of larger MOCs, but I love seeing it as an actual head because they do work, but they can be harder to use. So it's nice to see it being used very well here. So love your work, Ahri. You've certainly done justice in revamping that original character, but also kind of making it your own, which is awesome. Let's move over to the next MOC, and this is actually by the brother of Ahri, and his name is Luka. And this is actually kind of more directly a revamp. It's a revamp of Kargarak. And I already said it's by Luka, of course. But yeah, so Kargarak is another sort of canon character very similar to what we were looking at before. This is Kargarak here. There's not always the best pictures of these characters, unfortunately, but a sort of very much more noticeable difference to this character specifically, which I love. Nothing wrong with taking it in a completely different direction. I really like the idea of giving it essentially like somebody who's riding the Visorak now, or this creature might not specifically be a Visorak. I don't know enough about the canon character, I apologize. But I just love the aesthetic of people like mounting Visorak or other sort of crazy bug creatures like this and just using them as horses, essentially. I love the visual of just like staring out into the deserts of whatever Bionicle planet you might be on and seeing, just dudes riding around on big bugs. I think that's awesome. I think it's a really cool idea. So I love that. I also like that in some of these pictures, it kind of looks like there's almost like a saddle on the back of the beast of burden that he's riding here. That's really cool. I like the idea of just putting a big old saddle on the back of a giant bug and just being like, all right, buddy, to town. Away we go. It's really cool. I also quite enjoy the inclusion of the trans green elements on this Visorak here. To me, it really looks like it's sort of like dripping with venom, or there is just some sort of like poison stored in its like, tusks or claws or whatever. And I think that's cool. I think it's a really nice way of, showing the sort of offensive capabilities of this character, or, its power over poison or something like that. It's awesome. I think it's a fun little detail. I've seen it before, but just looking at it again, I also enjoy seeing CCBS armor and those larger claw pieces combined with a Visorak body. They actually work really well together. I almost kind of wish that Bionicle G2 did CCBS versions of like Visorak or even Borok and stuff, just to see how some of those newer pieces might have been integrated into those sorts of designs, because I actually think it lends itself pretty nicely. There's sort of like maybe a subtle difference between the textures of the Visorak body and the CCBS armor, but they actually work quite well together regardless, like texture-wise and just sort of general look-wise. So yeah, I really like that. I really like that indeed. And 6 legs on the Visorak I think also works really well, and yeah, just in general it's a fun little mount. And the rider as well, a little bit sort of more like skinny and maybe not as like menacing of a dude, but when you're riding a big bug, you don't need to be menacing. So I kind of like that, the idea of maybe a sort of scrawnier dude who's best friends with this giant bug, and the two travel together, fight crime, and do all sorts of awesome stuff. So yeah, it's pretty cool. So lots to love about this. Love your work. Let's move on to the second last mock now. And this is by Ender Toa, and it's called Dunmar, Elemental Guardian of Earth. I adore this. I think there's some awesome kind of like contrast in textures and colors here. Using all these Karapar armor pieces and combining it with this very sort of like detail-orientated, like industrial-looking like aesthetic of this sort of like old grey and dark bluish grey. It's awesome. It's really, really cool. It kind of gives that Karapar armor this almost sort of like slight rusted look, and I don't know, it's almost it's really cool. He's like a sort of like scrap bot, sort of like a little bit kind of like steampunky almost. Just needs a smokestack, But yeah, it's really cool. It's a very lovely color combo that I wouldn't have expected to have looked as nice as it does. So yeah, it's really cool. I love too his arm design here, using those sort of larger like arm sort of body pieces that appeared on the original Rakshi sets, and really integrating this arm design, hand design, all sorts of stuff into it. It works really well. I think it's cool. It kind of almost looks like he's sort of got like a protective armor around his arm, or that's just sort of like how his arm looks. I don't know. It's just a really nice looking design in general, so I think that's cool. I also like seeing Redak, the Black Paraka's weapon in gold, being used there as this sort of like mechanical chainsaw that sort of looks like it's a part of the Karapar armor, like it's some sort of armor that he's actually physically put onto his body, and he's got like tools that go with it and stuff, and it's got all those different tubes that sort of flow around the body and stuff like that. I don't know, I think that looks really, really cool and really unique and different. And I don't know, I kind of get the sense that he's a sort of like mining robot that, goes down to the mines and uses machinery to, I don't know, get resources or whatever. It's cool. I like how just little stuff like that, even the little sort of light at the very top of him there, it starts to tell you what he might be doing, the sort of profession that he might have, how he spends his time, all that sort of stuff. I love it when a weapon immediately sort of communicates character or story to you, and I think that's doing that here. Well, at least for me it is, so I quite enjoy that there. It's a fun little mock with a really unique color scheme and just a very distinct visual look to it, so love your work. Let's move over to the final mock now. This is by my boy Ezreal, a guy who helps out a lot with the channel, so I very much appreciate that. And he's a patron. Thank you for your patronage. And he has built this mock here called Thresh the Chain Warden. Now, I believe this is a character from League of Legends, I want to say. I don't know League of Legends very well, but if you do, I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Here are some pictures of what this is based off, in case you don't know. Or you do know, and you're just like, it's that guy. Let's have a look at that guy. So, I think this is awesome. I think the little Photoshop edits that he's done here as well, around the trans blue here, just perfectly complements this mock. I adore it. Very, very cool. The lantern design that he's done here is also very nice. And also just the idea of mocks with lanterns is awesome. I don't know, you don't see enough of them, you know? And I think it's a really cool aesthetic that you can get. And just in general, lanterns are cool. Why did we invent, like, torches on our smartphones? I want to carry around a lantern. This is not even really related to Biss. I just think it's a cool aesthetic. So put it in your mocks, because it works really well. I think there's something very, like, horror-themed about it, very sort of like Halloween of sorts, you know? I know that holiday's come and gone, but it's a cool aesthetic. So if you are aiming for a more sort of sinister, scary, spooky, evil kind of mock, maybe a lantern's a nice sort of weapon or accessory for them of sorts. So it's something to consider. I also quite enjoy the way the torso has been designed here. The fact that he's got those gold keys is another little awesome accessory. Love it. Love a good few little bits of accessories or fun little details like that are thrown into a mock. I think it always goes a long way and just looks very, very nice. And I like, too, the way that the torso's been done. Because essentially, I don't know, the way that I've sort of envisioned how he built this is he sort of built the torso underneath. And then that sort of octagonal connector piece that sort of acts as almost like the heart light on this character here. And it's then sort of got those 4 like arm pieces that sort of flow onto the back and sort of on the shoulders or sort of along the waist as well there. It's kind of a nice aesthetic there. It almost looks like you could kind of pop it off and it would be this sort of separate spider, which I don't think is intended, but just in terms of the way that's been designed, I like the idea of him building this torso, not being quite happy with it, and then sort of just attaching armor over the top of it and kind of wrapping it around. I think it's a nice way of, if you are building a torso for your mocks, and it just doesn't quite look nice, can you just add armor over the top of it that maybe doesn't even connect? You can kind of almost just sort of wrap it around it of sorts. I don't know, I think it's just an interesting way of approaching that. I don't know if that was specifically Ezreal's like build process with that, but I like that idea of finding ways of just kind of wrapping armor around, especially too, because just aesthetically that could look really nice. Like heck, you could probably even sort of attach like shoulder pads or further armor onto those specific arms that fold around the shoulders or fold around the waist there, because there's probably little connection points on there, you know? So I don't know, think about that. Instead of just attaching armor over, you know, like the front or the back, how can you sort of find ways of wrapping it around the sides or sort of along the top or the bottom or whatever? I think that's cool, you know? Or even just that, armor that actually detaches and does become a spider. I know I just sort of said that just so you knew what I was specifically talking about, but that could be cool too. Like armor that, kind of like Bloodsport and Suicide Squad, the armor he just rips bit out of his armor and it becomes a gun, or I don't know, rips stuff off and it becomes a spider or a little drone or whatever. I know Bloodsport didn't do that in the movies, but you know, that could be the thing you're playing with on your mock. There's an idea for you. Take it and run with it. Do what you want with it. But yeah, I don't know. I think that's pretty cool. And just in general, I think this is a lovely rendition of the character from the concept art we saw before. Very nice way of sort of trying to match the sort of toothy maw of the character there. And just in general, a lovely sort of spooky aesthetic and a very fun color scheme. You know, black and a light trans blue there. Beautiful. So, love your work. That's it for this episode of Fan Submitted Mocks today. I hope you very much enjoyed. Like I said, I said the fan submission email at the start of the episode, so move on back to the start of the episode if you want to see what that was, or check the description below. It's there so you can copy and paste it. While you're in the description, be sure to check the links to all the mocks that you saw in today's episode. Because it's a fan submitted mocks episode, I don't always have links for the mocks, but a good amount of them in this episode did. But some of them it might just say emailed submission because they didn't have any social media or didn't tell me about it. So yes, by all means, check out what you can and let those builders know what you think of their mocks, because they're talented people and they deserve your thoughts and love. Go comment, go leave a like on their stuff. I'm sure they'd appreciate it. While you're in the description as well, there is links to my own social media, my Patreon, all sorts of different stuff. So if you want to see some of the things that I've got going on, head on over there and check it out. Or don't. Do what you want. I'm not going to force you to do anything. But check it out if you want. I'm sure you'd enjoy it. Thank you very much for listening. Hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next episode. Thank you, and bye for now.